Let me ask you about player development. And I don't want to keep you too long this morning, but player development, how important is that when you're looking at programs? That has been um, valid, invalid criticism at Carolina at times, especially on the defensive end, defensive side of it. But if you're a player, high level recruited player like yourself, and you go to a school, obviously you went to Florida State, you had the opportunity to be developed and the best timing there that you could have been there. How important is that for these guys? Or is it like you mentioned, I think I should be playing. I'm just going to go somewhere else where I can play and player development be damned with it. Where's your take there?
Oh, I think player development is what separates the good coaches from the great coaches. Because I think good coaches can go out and get anybody they want. They can recruit, they can get the player there. But it's what do you do with them? And you can have a good program, but how do you get to be a great program is once you take that really good talent and you develop and you turn it into great talent. So there is and I'm glad you brought that up because I don't want to diminish, and that's how Nick Saban has a dynasty because he is an outstanding recruiter and Bama's been able to amass the best talent in the country. But then you combine that with Nick Saban's ability to create a staff which develops that talent, and then you've got a dynasty. Like that's the perfect recipe that you could have. But player development is clearly something that I think the smarter players, the players that I would want if I was a coach that was recruiting, is somebody who wants to be taught, who's willing to put in the work. And that's something I talked with a lot with Mike Norvell, the head coach at Florida State, because it wasn't easy at first and they weren't getting the top tier recruits. And his first year was COVID and they had a lot of issues. Their recruiting classes weren't in the top 15, which was a rarity for Florida State. And I remember talking to Mike Norvell about it, and he was like, we don't want those guys. I am telling our players that I'm recruiting that we are going to have a process, that we are building something, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to take hard work, and it's going to take a lot of repetition, and it might take some losing some games. We will get better. We will get you there, but you have to buy into it. And I thought that straightforward message did two things. One, it helped weed out a lot of the guys who would say, well, they don't respond to that messaging. Well, good. I wouldn't want those players I wouldn't want those players coming to my school. It also weeded out a lot of players that he didn't recruit that were on the team. And I think you're seeing the Miami Hurricanes deal with that right now. Mario takes over. All of a sudden the season doesn't turn out the way you want. You got some bad apples. He's got to weed those out because he wants to clear up scholarships for the players that do. But I think player development is essential especially at a place like Carolina. If you want to start winning ACC championships and contending for them, you've got to maximize because as good a recruiter as Mac Brown is, some things are never going to change. I don't think you're going to see UNC as a top 5 recruiting class. Top 15? Absolutely. Georgia, Ohio State, Bama, USC, like the usual suspects, Notre Dame, they're going to own those top 5 recruiting classes. But once you get the recruiting, the player development, then I think that's when you could have a special type year. And if you have a special quarterback, which is why Carolina's even thinking about a special type year, is because they have a special QB who has been developed to play the way he is. And Phil Longo's done an outstanding job. One of the reasons he's in the Broyles Award running and very deserving candidate is because of the job they've done getting Drake May up to speed and playing at such a high level. And we've seen that on the offensive side of the ball. Now we need to see it on the defense side of the ball. And then you could, have a more complete team and a better chance of winning the ACC.
Yeah, Danny, Mac made the point when he took the job a couple of years ago that he wanted to run basically what Lincoln Riley was running at the time in Oklahoma. And that's what Longo has done. I want to get your take on the conversation and the merits of it, that when you run an offense like Lincoln Riley does and that Phil Longo does, or maybe even more of a traditional air raid like a Mike Leach or
Josh Heupel.
Exactly, that crowd. Yeah. When you're that explosive offensively, is that a detriment to your defense, and does that limit how good your defense can be?
I don't think so at all. We used to have this at Florida State because we had a great defense, so it probably didn't matter. But we were running the up tempo. We were running the fast break offense because Charlie was a basketball player, so they nicknamed it the fast break offense. And then I came in, and thankfully they kept doing it because I was worried they'd go back to more traditional offense, but we kept doing it. And they started tracking our scoring drives, and it was 3 plays, 1 minute, 17 seconds. It was quick scoring drives. And they were like, is this a bad thing? Never apologize for putting points on the board, right? No matter how long it takes. And I think that's a little bit unfounded. I do think there are times in the game where there should be continuity between like game awareness. When should we try to change tempos, dial it back a little bit, maybe give our defense more of a break? And that to me is something where the head coach can step in, talk with the offensive coordinator, and especially if like you just have to have that feel for the ebbs and flows of the games. But I think it does come down to a lot of those schools that we mentioned have offensive minded coaches. Where do you think the priority is in recruiting? It's on the offensive side of the ball. I think that is something that goes under the radar because you only have a certain amount of scholarships, right? Offensive minded coach, you want to make sure you've got great receivers, great running back, great quarterback. So you're spending a lot more of your scholarship equity on that side of the ball. I think that's one of the kind of underlying issues a lot of times under the radar is that you're not spending because those coaches are directing the recruiting, operation, and maybe you overlook some of the deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball. And that was something Lincoln Riley said at Oklahoma because he was starting to realize, man, those SEC defensive linemen are different. We need to try to get some of those defensive linemen. And it was a little bit that was after they had been to the playoffs and lost like 2 or 3 times. And then he's like, oh, okay, now he should have addressed that right away, but he wanted to make sure they could have all the offensive pieces, so it's human nature because you're going to take care of what you prioritize. And I think that's the issue that comes in. But like in game, I think there should be an awareness, but I would never apologize for having a prolific offense that's scoring and scoring fast, right? That doesn't make much sense.